hello. I hope that everyone has had a great holiday and you are all now looking forward to the new year, if that's something you celebrate. This is my second time trying to record this podcast because the first time I was about maybe a minute from finishing and then the fire alarms all went off and I had to evacuate. So very exciting. Anyway, have any of you heard the expression long in the tooth? It's usually reserved for those of advanced years and comes from the fact that there's normally some gum recession as we age, and this gum recession makes your teeth look longer. For a couple of years now, I've had gum recession on a single tooth, my front right Dracula tooth, my canine. Not because I'm of advancing years, but because I'm right-handed and apparently brush my teeth like some kind of maniac. And hard brushing right on that front bit there has meant I've pushed the gum back. And it's not really been a big deal for me. Until recently, I've started to have a lot of sensitivity and kind of low-level pain there and kind of avoiding chewing with the front right of my mouth, which is a bit weird. So naturally, I'm keen to find a solution to this. So research tells me that I'm pretty much down to two options that will work. And that is, first of all, either a gum graft, where they cut a bit of healthy tissue at the roof of my mouth and then suture it in, or a gum graft using tissue from a cadaver, or the next one was pinhole surgery, where they kind of make pinhole in your gum and then put a little hook thing in and then pull your gum down back into position. Both of these things sound absolutely brutal to me. So if there are any dentists listening, then please send me an email and tell me if there's any other solution to this. Although I'm kind of at the point now where I've realized that I don't think there is. Anyway, looking at those two options that I had there, I got to there from researching using critical thought and looking at a hierarchy of evidence. Now, if you're a long-time listener of the show, you'll know that I want everyone to be empowered to see through the nonsense and find relevant and powerful information. So the hierarchy I use when I look for information is, if I'm looking at anything online, I'm looking for a website, usually ending in .edu. That's typically, or a .ac. Those are academic websites. So I know that information is probably coming from peer-reviewed studies and so forth and has statistical weight. Next below that would be a .gov and then a .org, which will be a charity. And then at the very bottom of my hierarchy would be a .com, because literally anyone can have a .com and then just spout utter nonsense. Also, YouTube, TikTok are not sources. But I thought it might be fun to have a look at information out there on what I could do for gum recession that isn't backed by research or science and see what's said. And I came across something that I've actually heard of before, people saying that they used oil pulling. And I've heard of this before in holistic fitness a few years back when I met up with, I won't say a friend, let's say an acquaintance for breakfast in Phoenix, Arizona. A girl that I'd met, first of all, 8 years prior when I was training at a gym in Seoul in South Korea. I remember she was a kindergarten teacher, and then she went into coaching CrossFit, traveled all around the world, Hong Kong, Abu Dhabi, Phoenix, Thailand, Europe, and so on. And her experience was it was really hard to make money or get ahead in fitness coaching. So what she needed to do was rebrand as a holistic coach, because then she could have all these kind of ancillary products that she could recommend to people, supplements and things like that. And one of the main add-ons she talked about that she was going to make the most money on selling people was oils, and then went on to talk to me about oil pulling. Now, in my book, this is really quite interesting to me because many, although I will admit not all, holistic coaches seem to have a huge problem with mainstream medical industry. And their main beef is that doctors will often prescribe drugs that they're getting a kickback on because they're partnered with a pharmaceutical company. In fact, doing some research on this, I came across a study that up to 20% of doctors' incomes comes from pharmaceutical partnerships. Now, this sounds pretty bad, that we could be taking drugs that doctors are giving us just because doctors are paid to give them to us. But I'm not so sure, simply because even if a doctor is paid to recommend a drug, it's still the type of drug or classification of drug for the specific ailment that I have. Doctors aren't out there prescribing drugs for things that those drugs don't treat and shoehorning us into taking drugs that they're paid to give us that we don't need at all. Medical ethics is still a real thing. But that discussion aside, what really is the difference between a doctor prescribing something a pharmaceutical company is paying them to prescribe and a holistic practitioner telling us that we need to use certain oils or supplements or tinctures because they can earn more money from you by recommending those things? There's literally no difference. But actually, I'll argue there is, because I would argue that the ethics in this case of the holistic coach are much more suspect, because in this case, the holistic recommendation is the only one in which the recommended prescription does not work. It won't help you with your intended outcome and is there purely to earn the practitioner money, not to make you better. These things fall apart when we apply a principle from the philosophy of science called the demarcation problem. Because we have an issue. How do we know the difference between science and pseudoscience? And we got Karl Popper, who was a philosopher of science, and Kuhn, and they talk about the demarcation problem, and that is how we demarcate the difference between science and pseudoscience. A good example of science versus pseudoscience is astronomy versus astrology. There was a girl that worked as the concierge in my residential apartment complex, and I loved to troll her because she was doing a degree in astronomy. And when she told me that, I said, wow, so what's your star sign? She wasn't impressed. I thought it was pretty funny. It wasn't really. But anyway, in astronomy, we make a hypothesis about possible states of affairs in the universe. And if things don't follow that hypothesis, then there's a puzzle. Then scientific method is applied to investigate this puzzle and eventually find a solution. Astrology has no such puzzles because investigation cannot possibly ever provide an answer. All that happens is we just roll on to the next wild prediction or change our interpretation of the claim. I mean, I could read my star sign and say, I don't really like that one. I think I'll just go and read Leo instead because that one sounds more fun today. In other words, science is something that can be falsified. Pseudoscience cannot. Pseudoscience can never be proven wrong because there's literally no evidence for it. So, bearing that stuff in mind, let's have a look at what oil pulling is and the types of claims that oil pulling proponents are making. So when I looked it up, straight away a red flag, which is that the very description of it is that oil pulling is an alternative medical practice. Now, I'm not sure about you, but if I were unwell, I wouldn't want there to be an alternative to medical practice. I would like to be signed up for the actual medical practice, please. Alternative itself is also just alternative. It's an alternative expression for unproven and based on centuries-old ideas before we actually knew how these things work. I have to laugh to myself when people cherry-pick things and say that, the way that things have always been done or the way that our ancestors did things are the best way to do them. Okay, that's fine. If the way our ancestors did things is the best, if you ever need any invasive surgery, just do it the way it was always done. Let's not sterilize any of the equipment and also just shelve the anesthesia. So, oil pulling, alternative medical practice, apparently an edible oil, usually sesame oil, although a lot of people are talking about coconut oil also being used, is swished around in your mouth. And that's the oil part of oil pulling. So what's the pulling? Right, another one of those totally vague, unfalsifiable expressions. It's pulling out the toxins. What these toxins are, anyone's guess. That's not specifically mentioned. I'll assume it's the same toxins that recently got an alternative medical practitioner here in the UK jailed for life. He claimed that the bruising in patients coming from slapping therapy that he had prescribed to diabetics, whilst also influencing them to stop their insulin, was the toxins being released. They died, and he went to jail forever. So, I also remember the same kind of nonsense being spouted by someone that I was recommended to go see. I never took a recommendation from the recommender ever again. And it was for a sports massage in Hong Kong, maybe 10 years ago or something. And I had this huge outbreak on my skin after the massage. And I was told that that was the toxins being released. It wasn't. I was allergic to whatever oil they were using. But yeah, one of the biggest health providers in the UK, well, alternative health providers, also by no economic coincidence, have 715 stores where they sell alternative therapies and supplements. And they have a whole page on their website about oil pulling, where they say oil pulling works. Well, no, it doesn't. That's false. Oil pulling works by quite literally pulling the plaque and bacteria that causes it from your teeth and gums. Right, so pretty much like mouthwash then, okay? The thick and sticky oil absorbs the film of bacteria that develops over and between our teeth, helping to empty your mouth of germs before you've even brushed. Those who've taken up oil pulling long term claim to see great results. I hope that these people also had a stunt mouth that they were using so that they could have another model to compare it against. It's widely believed to improve the appearance of teeth, with many reporting fresher breath too. There is some science behind it also. Not a lot of science, just some science. Studies have discovered that lauric acid, one of the fatty acids found in coconut oil, has antimicrobial qualities. What's more, a 2008 study observed a noticeable reduction in bacteria in the mouth within 2 weeks of starting daily oil pulling. So, I actually read this 2008 study that they're referring to here. Statistically weak. It was a study on 30 participants only. But more than that, it's prime cherry picking, because the study was comparing using no mouthwash to using, first of all, coconut oil, second of all, chlorhexidine mouthwash. And the coconut oil was shown to reduce plaque compared to using nothing, but it wasn't even close to the efficacy of the dental mouthwash. So they're really making a false claim. So, it's arguable, because they're saying there was a noticeable reduction. Yes, there was, but the whole point is, in terms of an outcome, it was showing that dental mouthwash chlorhexidine was much superior to either using no mouthwash or using oil pulling. They also just missed out the part of the fact that the study was only done on 30 people. If you just want to know about anything, follow the money is what people say, right? If there's money to be made and the claims are unverifiable, you should probably avoid it. We know there's a huge amount of money in pharmaceuticals, but the difference is the mountains of evidence which verify the claims. Peer-reviewed studies, meta-analysis, and statistical weight. It's like the people that lap up the fact that Elon Musk says he's sending people to Mars. No, he's not. The astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson hit the nail on the head when he talked about that particular board meeting. So, Elon, you want to go to Mars? Yes. Okay, and how much is that going to cost us? Billions. Is it safe? Probably not. People are going to die. Okay, and what's the return on investment? None. Okay, meeting adjourned. Anyway, that's it. Have a great new year, everyone. I'll be looking forward to continuing to share fitness, science, philosophy, and whatever else I think that I can get carte blanche to talk about in 2025. If you have any questions or just want to say hi, please email me, getfitguy@quickanddirtytips.com. Get Fit Guy is a Quick and Dirty Tips podcast, thanks to the team, Morgan Christensen, Holly Hutchins, Director of Podcast Burn and Getchus, Davina Tomlin, and me. If you have a question, again, you can voicemail me, 510-353-3104, email getfitguy@quickanddirtytips.com. For more information about the show, visit quickanddirtytips.com or check out the show notes in your podcast app.